Welcome back to Rowdy Reads, and we are now ready for the 5th chapter of the King's Quest Companion, and this is the one based on the big one of the most infamous installments in the King's Quest game series. Let us just get right into Absence Makes the Heart Go Yonder. The Prelude. The universe is not fair. It never has been fair, and never will be. Indeed, the entire multiverse is not fair. It wasn't made that way. It wasn't made to accommodate the folk and creatures and mountains and seas that blemish the worlds and celestial orbs. It is much too large to be conscious of such less than trivial things. The silent universe concerns itself with the greater things, and with the cosmic balances, the symmetry of forces that keep the stars and planets in their paths, the tides and oceans in their places, and the magical pumps and reservoirs primed. And it concerns itself with the fine balance between the light and the dark, the eternal war between good and evil. The universe could care less about what happens to the players in those battles. Thus it seems that King Graham of Daventry and his family are forever charged, although some might say cursed, to play a grave and crucial and essential role in the very existence of our universes. For those forces, good and evil, are unlike the impersonal ones, which function to keep the sky from falling and creatures from floating off into the heavens. Good and evil are only seen through the actions and compulsions of the human and other folk. Good the urge for life and harmony and renewal of all creatures. Evil, the urge to chaos, destruction, disillusion, and self above all else. At some times, good predominates. At others, evil. These twin forces are not only part of the very fabric of the universe. They cannot exist unless the other does. Without evil, there is no good, and if there is good, it must be balanced with the dark force. This is, I suspect, the universe's way of preventing stagnation. Conflict causes change, and change keeps time and existence from coming to a dead stop. And change keeps existence interesting. Could the maker or makers of the universe bore easily? And do our life and death struggles amuse them? I would hope for better from them. In any case, all the natural philosophers and scholars and metaphysicians I have consulted are unanimous in one fact. At this time in the existence of Daventry, the conflict between good and evil is represented by the dark wizard Manannan and all of his family on the side of evil, and King Graham and his family for good. Neither side chose to be what they are, nor understand why they were chosen. The final winner will determine the course of our world until the next crisis arrives and the fight is renewed again with new players. Graham, of course, disagrees with my theory. He chortles and says I think too much. But he does not laugh deeply as he dismisses my musings, and usually finds a way to quickly change the subject. Perhaps he doesn't want to dwell on the trials that have beset him and his loved ones. You really can't blame him. He may be a king, but he is most definitely a mortal man. And mortal men, even kings, cry. Part the First. As is his habit, King Graham began his day with a stroll through the forest to Lake Maley, where a vigorous swim dissolved the last sticky threads of sleep from his brain, the morning fuzz from his eyes. He says his dawn exertions keep his body firm and his thoughts clear. Graham is no longer the young knight who won the throne of Daventry. More than a score of years have passed since then, and those decades have been spent in rebuilding his ravished kingdom, only to see new troubles and disasters strike when all seemed finally well. Not all of the acts and decisions he has made over the years have been good ones, but he has always done what he felt was best for Daventry, even to the sacrifice of his only daughter. Rosella has forgiven him for taking her to the dragon, but Graham says the memory of her tied to the stake, awaiting death with her eyes open and dry, still sometimes disturbs his dreams. That she was rescued and survived only eases the horror a little. The responsibilities that are placed on a king's head along with his crown are many, and they have put a few deep lines in his face. Valanice, his queen, says they make him look dashing. He says they are laugh lines from his joy of living with her. Graham is no longer the slim knight that scampered up a narrow beanstalk to the land of the clouds. The decades have filled him out, but with hard muscle, not soft flesh. His eyes are not quite what they used to be, and he would no longer care to attempt outrunning an ogre, but he is still in splendid physical condition. Although shaven by preference, he nevertheless looks like the monarch he is. That morning he was wearing his usual attire, the short tunic, pants, and high boots of a ranger. His head was topped with a long cap, rakishly adorned with one red feather. He calls it his adventurer's cap because it has accompanied him through the adventures that had won him Daventry's throne and the hand of Valanice. He had a leather traveling bag on his back, something he always carried in case he discovered something interesting to bring home. I will not recount much detail about how Mordack appeared on a hill overlooking Castle Daventry that day. As the king busied himself picking a few bright flowers as gifts for Valanice and Rosella, the sorcerer invoked magics powerful enough to rip the castle out of its very foundations, shrink and whirl it, and all within up into the sky and away. Witnesses to the awful event say that when Mordack and Castle Daventry vanished in front of their unbelieving eyes, they did not go poof, they thundered. It was this sound that brought Graham hurrying back. For a moment, he thought he had taken a wrong fork in the path back to his home. His eyes saw the great gash in the ground, and his nose smelled the lingering odor of those explosive energies, but his mind did not register what he was perceiving at that instant. How could he, really? Those who saw it happen had trouble believing. Graham spent a while staring, jaw getting closer to the ground. He is an intelligent man, and the evidence of his senses soon stirred his tongue. What is going on? Where is my castle? Considering the circumstances, Graham may be excused talking aloud to himself. It did bring a result. From above, an unusually deep and hollow voice surprised Graham, coming, it seemed, invisibly out of the air. Perhaps I can be of some help. A look around and up finally showed the king the owner of the mysterious voice. His name, Cedric, with no surname. He was short and stout, and clad just in a vest and monocle, that's all. For an owl, that is overdressed. And so it was that King Graham met who was fated to be his companion during the coming hardships and adventures, and it was an uncommon pairing indeed. Cedric was, and still is, both familiar, servant, and companion to the ancient and powerful high wizard Crispinofer. Crispinofer is said to have been the leader in our first withdrawal from the other world to Daventry. He now lives a quiet and anonymous life in the sovereignty of Serenia, unnoticed and forgotten by most folk of our world. He tells me he prefers it that way, having had more excitement in his life than he wishes to remember. In his words, everybody needs a bit of peace and relaxation every millennium or so. He prefers to be called Crispin, he says, because it is just too much bother for him to remember his entire name anymore. Cedric explained to Graham what had happened to Castle Daventry, although he knew not why. He suggested that his master might be able to help. Crispin knew Mordack somewhat, and had had dealings with him in the past. The king, with nowhere else to turn, accepted Cedric's suggestion. How far is it to Crispin's? He asked. Too far to walk, was the owl's reply. Let's fly. With that, Cedric flapped his wings and fell off his perch in an oak tree. Whoops, clumsy of me, he apologized, and fluttered awkwardly back to his branch. Graham winced in disbelief. Cedric then conjured a small bag from somewhere and sprinkled a light powder down on Graham's head. Fairy dust to give you flight. Just flap your arms with all your might. I'm allergic to fairy dust, Graham objected. Then he sneezed loudly. The force of the sneeze lifted him into the air and kept him aloft, and frantically flapping to stay upright. After a few moments, the king just began flapping harder and followed Cedric higher into the sky. Between sneezes, he hoped the dust's magic wouldn't wear off before they got to Serenia. It didn't, but it didn't quite get him to Crispin's house either. Graham's impromptu flying was a little short, and he did his aerial journey neck-deep in a small pond which stands next to the cottage. The water washed the dust from Graham and brought relief from the sneezes. The splash brought the old man outside to see what was the matter. If Crispin's beard were any longer, he would be unable to walk for fear of always tangling it around his ankles. He walks stooped, assisted by a staff with short, slow steps. His eyes, though, are a clear, bright blue, almost iridescent. There is a keenness and sharpness behind them, in strange contrast to his constant forgetfulness. It is as if he is playing the role of old fool. Crispin invited Graham inside and offered him peppermint tea for warmth and for something to wrap their hands and conversation around. He said that he knew Mordek was a bad one with an evil mind, but could give no clue as to why he might kidnap the king's castle and family. Crispin told Graham that he would offer him what little help he could provide. That help came in 3 parts. The first was a foul-tasting piece of smoked magical white snake. As Graham swallowed it, proud that he did not gag it back up, Crispin informed him that its power would allow him to understand and even speak with animals, trees, and the natural world. The king suspected that would be quite useful. The second piece of aid was a dull, dusty, and nicked magical wand. Crispin said it was an old one of his with little power left. However, it could be charged and might even take a liking to Graham. It wasn't much, but it was the only one he could give. The king suspected it would not be very useful, but he took it to be polite. The last thing he offered Graham was Cedric. Who, me? Cedric hooted. Don't do me any favors. Neither Graham nor Cedric approved of the idea. Now, both of you get out of here before Mordek does something worse, Crispin commanded. He nearly shoved the two out of the house. Thank you, sir, for all your help, were the king's last words to the wizard. He was being polite. He didn't think Cedric would be useful at all. Cedric sat silent on a branch, pecking lice from between his feathers, pausing often to retrieve the monocle which would fall from his beak each time he lowered his head. Graham leaned against an odd device that adorned Crispin's front yard, occasionally spinning one of its moving parts. This finally got the owl's attention. Be careful, King. That's a universe interpreter, and it keeps the stars aligned, or something like that. It's not a plaything. Graham grumped, removed his hands, and tugged at an ear. Don't call me King. Graham is fine, and I hope you have better advice to give than that. Now that you mention it, Graham, Serenia Town is not too far south of here. It's a place to begin looking, and at the very least, it is a good place to obtain food and other provisions. That's not a bad idea. Lead on, old brainy bird, and try coming up with some ideas for me to get a few coins to pay for those things. South through the woods they began, ignoring the steep trail that began a short way from Crispin's doorstep, and which led up into the great mountains. Cedric informed Graham that beyond the mountains lay the northern sea, and that was where Mordak kept his castle, or so it had been in the past. It was on a strange island in that ocean, and it appeared at times to float above the waves. They both realized they must eventually venture that steep road up, but only after they gathered the necessary supplies to survive a trip through the icy heights. A viper was sunning itself warily in that trail also, alert to all signs of movement. Its presence made that hard eastward path even less desirable. As they looked on the snake, Graham heard a series of noises coming from within a stand of trees just west of him. It sounded like sobbing. That's what it was. A young man, noble by his dress, sat despondently on a log, hand in hand and holding back tears. Cedric suggested that it would be a good idea to see what was the matter. "He looks like he could use a little cheering up, I would say." Graham walked over to the young man. His name, Graham discovered, was Prince Herbert of Grays, and his story was sad and simple. Herbert told Graham that he and his sweetheart had been strolling hand in hand through the woods, looking at little else but each other's eyes. As if nowhere a particularly ugly witch appeared before them and demanded that Herbert become her love. Revolted at the thought, he rejected the old hag, and embraced his blonde princess more tightly to him. This did not please the hag at all. The next thing he knew, Herbert was standing in the forest alone, the witch and his Alicia both gone. He had been searching for her for months since, and his desperation was almost too much for him to bear. Graham and Cedric listened, but could offer no help other than to be alert for the princess as they ventured upon their own quest. This slight hope, though, was enough to swell life back into Herbert, and gave him new resolve to trudge onward. "Fare thee well, stranger," he waved to them. "A man must do what a man must do, and I must be going on. Thank you for your small kindness, and may both our quests be successful." He disappeared from sight, but the tune of his traveling song lingered a bit behind him. From the spot where they first heard Herbert sobbing, it was but a short hike to Serenia town. The largest collection of human folk for leagues around, it rested lazily at the base of the great mountains, dipping its water-wheeled toe into the fast, deep river which flowed rapidly by its walls. Its thatched roofs and smoking chimneys gave invitation to all to pass a little time and a little coin within its gates. It was an invitation that Graham accepted. Cedric chose to wait outside. Few folks were about that day in the town square, a child or two chasing hoops, or a matron or two shopping, and an occasional dog barking at phantoms or doing its business on the cobblestone. By an alleyway, Graham noticed a man attempting to fix the broken wheel of his wagon. He was at the edge of a bad temper, and was using his hammer to release frustration. Graham is among the kindest and most helpful of people. It matters little to him if he is a king. If he spies some folk or creature in need of assistance, he feels it is his duty to offer assistance. "Is there anything I could do to help?" the king asked the man. But thanks anyway," the fellow replied. "Been trying to fix this for years, but never seem to get anywhere. It's all right, gives me something to do. If you insist, have a good day." This slight conversation had gone nowhere, but during it, Graham's nostrils had detected the aroma of fish, and not a very fresh one. A quick glance into a barrel near to where he stood, he confirmed the smell. "Yuck," he murmured. Let me pause for a moment to say something else about King Graham. He has a set of rules that he follows without exception whenever he goes adventuring. "I've gone adventuring too often in my life," he told me, "but when I do, I always heed the advice my father gave me when I was a boy. My daddy used to tell me, 'Boy, if I have learned anything in my life, I have learned this. When in doubt or in trouble, pick up anything that is not nailed down, and if it is, check for loose nails or boards. Check carefully into, under, above, below, and behind things. Read everything. You might learn something. Wear clean undergarments, brush after meals, and always remember, nothing is as it appears. Graham had no doubt that the old fish looked as disgusting as it smelled, but his family was in trouble, and the fish wasn't nailed to anything. He took it, glad there were so few about to notice his revulsion. With that done, he hurried back out of the gate of Serenia before the scent had him kicked out. "Smells yummy, Graham, old boy. I didn't realize you had such gourmet sensibilities." Cedric refused to let the king's fine gun go unnoted. Graham repeated his father's maxims to the owl and invited him to leave if he disagreed. Cedric did his best to wrinkle his beak and then pointed his wing toward the west. "There's much better food that way, King. After you." Indeed there was. The road west first went past a bakery. The cakes and other sweets must have just left the oven because the smells of sugar and butter and cinnamon and spice in the air was almost enough to cover that of the fish. With no coin in his pocket, though, Graham could not go inside, despite the urgings of his sweet tooth. Instead, he continued on the road away from town. The Swarthy Hog Inn beckoned next with the smells of roasting meats and the clatter of emptying cups. This, too, was passed with reluctance. At home in Daventry, the king has a magic chest, which always stays filled with gold. He and his kingdom have no financial concerns because of this, but that very situation made his lack of coin at the moment more acute. He wasn't hungry yet that day, but he was beginning to know what being poor was. Graham wondered what he would do when it was time to eat. He has known little hunger in his life, and did not want to make his acquaintance again. So with those thoughts in mind, and the smell of thoroughly putrid fish in his nose, Graham left the more populous parts of Serenia in search of treasure. Cedric followed at a safe distance. The fish didn't stay with Graham for very long. Not far from the inn, where the trees of the forest were just beginning to thin into the wide brushland, the king spotted a large black bear ripping his claws at a dead tree. Thousands of honeybees zipped furiously around the beast, attempting to save their honey from the belly of the bear. We have noted before that a creature in need always touches the heart of Graham. In this case, the bear apparently needed food, and the bees salvation. Despite the wisdom of his father's advice, Graham had been having serious second thoughts about the dead fish. And bears like fish almost as much as they like honey. So, with one true toss, Graham was able to come to the assistance of both bee and Bruin. He hurled the decaying thing and hit the bear sharply on its side. According to Graham, it squished more than anything else, but it caught the beast's attention, reminding it that a dead fish in its paw is worth more than an angry bee up the nose. The bear happily bounded off, licking the slime from its new meal. That should do a lot to clear the air between us," Cedric quipped. But before Graham could tell him that the remark stank, another voice filled the meadow with a soft buzz. "I thank you, King Graham, for saving my nest." Startled, Graham glanced quickly to the hollow tree. One large bee flew out of a large hole in it and directly up to his face. It hovered there, wearing a crown and carrying a scepter, making no attempt to attack him. "I am Queen Beatrice, ruler of all the bees. I know of your quest, and am grateful for your aid. There is little I can do to help you, but please take a honeycomb from our tree. It may be useful to you at some time. Also, I grant you protection from the stings of all my subjects. No more I can do. Go now with our best wishes. Until we meet again." As one, Queen Beatrice and all the thousands of her subjects turned and buzzed quickly off. "I'm not going near that hole," said Cedric. "You get the honey." And this is just what Graham did, although he was sure at least one of the insects would stick him while his hand was groping at the tree's hollow. He was wrong. "That stick's not nailed down, your majesty," Cedric chided at Graham. He was pointing one wing to the ground at the base of the tree. "Aren't you going to obey your dear old dad and pick it up?" Cedric was starting to annoy the king. Reaching down, Graham grabbed the stick, intending to heave it at the bothersome bird. He held his irritation in check, though, and planned instead to pay the owl back in kind. Cedric saw the motion, however, and with a terrified squawk, winged quickly away and dead smack into the tree trunk. Graham's laughter stung more than any bee or the thump. Part the second. When Graham's son Alexander defeated the wizard Manannan, he was able to finance his escape from Ludor by separating a band of bandits from part of their treasure. Graham knew this story well, and it gave him inspiration. He needed treasure in order to journey across the great mountains in pursuit of Mordak. Like most folk, he had heard the tales told of the thieves of the endless desert, a 20 band of cutthroats who preyed on caravans and travelers there. Here Graham was on the very edge of the endless desert, and he needed coin. "You have got to be crazy," squawked Cedric. "You're going into the desert to search for bandits so you can rob them? You're going in without water? Without a map? You're going in without knowing where the oases are? Forget it. I'm staying here where there are worms and water. I'll send flowers to the funeral. If anyone ever finds your body, you cannot be serious." Graham was quite serious, even though he agreed with Cedric's assessment of his chances. His wife and family were worth most any risk, and while he realized that he could wander through Serenia begging for coin and assistance, it would not be a seemly thing for a king to do. Besides, evening was not far away, and the desert would be cooler then. If all went right, he would have treasure by morning. Then it would be off and after Mordak. As a plan, it seemed reasonable to him. "It seems insane to me," Cedric insisted for the last time. His protests went unheeded, though. Graham scratched Cedric's head and headed out into the desert. He intended to walk directly west from the bee's tree until he found an oasis, or decided to return in failure. He did not intend to wander aimlessly. If that plan didn't work, he would try again from another spot. Graham chose well. West, farther west he plunged, stumbling at last onto a few palm trees surrounding a pond of sweet water. Gratefully he drank his fill, wishing he had something with which to carry water with him as he hiked. As he rested, he thought he could see the outline of high hills or cliffs in the far north. He wasn't sure that he wasn't seeing a mirage, but decided to walk toward that horizon anyway. If he kept his bearings, he should be able to return to the oasis if he were mistaken. The sameness of the desert sands and the heat that refuses to go away are enough to make a person mad. A lapse of attention or a moment's confusion as to direction both mean a hard death. But Graham had not seen a mirage, and he kept his wits. He soon met what proved to be cliffs, but they were too steep to climb. Taking note of where he was, he trudged his way farther west, always hugging the cliff base. About the time he felt he must return or perish, he found a small spring. He also found the desert thieves for whom he had been searching. At first he thought that thunder had come to clear the clear, dry skies. The heat had slowed his mind some, so it took a few moments for it to register the sound as hoofbeats. It seemed to come from several horses. Graham immediately looked for cover, not knowing if the galloping was good news or bad. He suspected the latter. Some rocks near the spring looked as if they would hide him from sight, provided the riders did not stop to drink. It was a chance he had no choice but to take. Peering from his shelter, he watched as the bandits, which is what they were, careened past him and through an opening in the cliffs. It had been there all along, of course. Graham had fixed his focus on the water and then the bandits. In following their ride, he finally noticed that which he had not seen before. The cliffs were breached for 100 yards or more, and on the other side of the opening was an enormous temple carved out of the living cliffs themselves. Great stone statues of winged horses and lions stood at the bottom of a wide stone stair, and the carven image of some unknown demon or deity stared down from the temple's portal. The bandits raced their mounts straight to the temple steps and then dismounted. Carrying a heavy bag in one hand, and most likely loot, the leader of the small band waved a long staff which he held with the other. He shouted the words, "Open, Sesame!" and the great door to the temple dissolved into the air. The thief rushed inside, and moments later emerged with just the staff. At once the door solidified again behind the man, who then remounted his panting steed and sped back into the desert. The others followed, leaving Graham alone and unharmed. Open sesame, huh? I think I found what I've been looking for, where the thieves hide their treasure. And the magic word. All right, Graham, let's get some gold and get out of here. It is Graham's habit to speak aloud to himself, a habit best indulged in private. Graham left the shelter of the concealing rocks and made his way to where the bandit had shouted the words of opening. They didn't work for the king. He tried them accompanied by a wide gesture. No luck. He tried the words both loud and soft. Same lack of results. I guess I need the staff, he told himself. And that means I need to find their camp. So get moving, big ears. And don't forget to take a drink before you leave. Graham made sure he drank at the spring. The bandits had ridden both out of and into the southwest. It seemed most logical to Graham, therefore, that southwest from the temple was where they kept their hideout. Thoroughly refreshed by the spring's cool water, he chose to explore westward for 2 hours and then south. Another oasis was his reward, and the water there tasted better than the sweetest wine Graham had ever known. Then it was south again, as the sun sank mercifully below the horizon. For 3 more hours he stalked in that direction, until he thought he heard the sound of drums and cymbals drifting from the west. With much care and little concealment except for the growing dark, Graham approached the sound of revelry. He was not to be disappointed. Graham shortly found himself on the periphery of a desert camp. From the look of the man collapsed drunk on the sand, the encampment was that of the desert thieves. On the far side of the camp, loud voices and music came from one large tent. Through an opening in it, Graham could see the sleek, sweaty bodies of the swaying dancers. Their noise, he decided, would cover the sound of his movements. By the campfire, he discovered a clay jug full of water. Staying as much in the shadows as he could, hoping to blend in with the bandits, he approached the fire and quickly drank his fill. As he did so, Graham decided to first investigate the small tent that was closest to the fire. Loud snores came from within it, fluttering hard the tent's fabric. He knew that he must be swift and silent, or else he would be discovered. Before entering, Graham inhaled deeply and held his air lest the sound of his own breathing betray him. Swift and silent, he reminded himself. Swift and silent. Then he stepped through the opening. The bandit sleeping inside was snoring, but his sleep was restless. Knowing that he might awaken at any moment, Graham surveyed the tent's interior and discovered that he had chanced upon the tent of the staff's owner. He wasted no time marveling at his luck. Graham rushed to the back of the tent. Careful not to make a noise or touch the lightly sleeping man, he snatched the staff firmly and retraced his path to the outdoors. Releasing the breath he had been holding, Graham dashed east into the desert darkness, listening for any sound or alarm or pursuit. There was none. Graham escaped through the desert night, forever eastward. In fleeing with the staff, he had lost his bearings in the dark. Confused and disoriented, he decided to push on in the same direction. After several hours, he at last turned north, certain he could smell water. He must have. The oasis he finally drank at blessed him with a night of liquid dreams. The morning appears hot and fast in the endless desert. Heat steals appetite, so with fresh water in his belly, Graham felt ready to take on the bandits again. Or at least their treasure house. He turned his eyes north, hoping to spy the cliffs, but saw only dune and sand. No matter, he told the cloudless heavens, they are out there, and I'll never get to them by standing here. Graham's trek north that morning took him past a sun-bleached and vulture-picked skeleton. From its size, he assumed the unfortunate person had been a man, although that had become a meaningless fact after years in the sun. Lying next to the bones were the tattered remains of a boot, all that remained of the dead man's possessions. Graham recalls that it was a boot for a left foot, but doesn't know why he remembers such a trifle. Maybe he could envision himself in the same state, discovered by another wanderer with no identity and just a single left boot to remind the universe that he had once been more than white, dry bones. Graham took the boot with him as he continued onward to the northern cliffs. He moved more slowly, conserving strength, lost in the thoughts of his own mortality and the mystery of his family's fate. In time, he reached the cliffs and, looking around, realized that he was nearly at the temple. That knowledge gave him strength, and he hardly staggered at all as he walked the short way west to the life-restoring spring. The water still tasted good. After a while, Graham was ready to conquer the temple. Equipped with the staff and knowing the magic words, he was sure he would enter with little trouble. What concerned him, he says, was the speed with which the bandits entered the temple and left. It was if they had hurried, lest they be trapped inside when the door returned to solid. Graham wasn't sure of his conclusion, and hoped to discover a lever or button or something in the interior to allow him to stay for some time. But he resolved to enter and leave as quickly as he had entered, and departed the bandit tent, snatching what he could. He reasoned that he didn't need very much treasure to serve his need, and the bandits might return unheard, and surprise him if he stayed too long. Graham climbed to the temple's top step. Holding the staff aloft, he intoned, "Open Sesame!" At once, something he hadn't expected happened. The staff shattered in his hand. But before Graham could react to that apparently disastrous twist of fate, the great stone door dissolved, inviting him inside. The king wasted no time in remorse or confusion, but hurried the few steps inside and looked quickly around. No buttons, no levers, no pulleys. Lots of jewels and golden chests and bulging leather bags. The ransom of a world, perhaps two, lay a dozen steps away. Nearly at his feet shone one lone gold coin and a golden bottle. Graham wasted no time on decision and scooped up the coin, grabbed the metal bottle, and sprinted outside. He felt the magical door turn solid behind him and was sure it pinched off several stray hairs from the back of his head. Graham decided that he didn't want to know for sure that he was correct about that. That was quick. Graham sighed, releasing his tension, and wiped sweat from his brow. He wasn't sure it wasn't all from the heat. After a few slow, deep breaths, he tensed, thinking he heard horsemen approaching the temple again, perhaps in pursuit of him. Wasting not even the time it took to examine his treasures, Graham sprinted eastward along the cliffs. Despite his sudden flight, the king knew that safety lay in that direction. All he had to do was retrace his steps from the temple back to the oasis he had stopped at when he first ventured into the endless desert. Of course, he had to avoid capture, but in theory, it was a fine idea. Anyway, it worked, and he never heard nor saw any further signs of being chased. In fact, he tells me there may very well have never been any bandits after him at all. Just his overwrought nerves imagining pursuit. At the oasis, he drank deeply, and rapidly pushed east out of the sands to where he hoped Cedric was waiting. As annoying as the owl sometimes became, Graham welcomed the idea of seeing the talking bird. Perhaps Cedric would fall off a branch when he saw Graham. The king needed a laugh. Cedric didn't tumble, but Graham was happy to see him anyway. And thus it was that King Graham conquered the endless desert of Serenia, eluded its bandits, and escaped with some of their treasure. Part the third. Although I have tried, I have never been able to meet and speak with Cedric. For that reason, I have no idea whether he was relieved to see King Graham lurch out of the endless desert that day. Graham claims the bird was still sitting in the bee's tree, calmly munching on a grub and attempting to clean his monocle at the same time. He had to shout to get Cedric's attention. "Oh, there you are! I was beginning to wonder if you were ever coming back. At least you no longer smell like old fish. What, pray tell, is that thing in your hand?" Graham held up the golden bottle and showed it to the owl. "Treasure, Cedric, treasure! With this, we should be able to obtain all the provisions we need to cross the great mountains." It is it?" Cedric flew down beside Graham for a closer look. "Looks like a worthless hunk of brass to me." Graham looked more closely at the bottle, licked it slightly with his tongue, and discovered that, indeed, his golden dream was tarnished. "There might be a genie inside, if that's any consolation, King. Want to open it?" Graham thought about the idea for a few moments. Once in Colima, he had obtained a brass lamp, which, when rubbed, produced a genie that presented him with gifts. He rubbed the bottle lightly a few times, but nothing happened. Then he considered removing the lid. "On second thought," cautioned Cedric, "there might be a daemon or evil spirit inside. Let's take it back to Crispin just to be safe." Graham nodded a reluctant approval, then bit into the coin he had also taken from this temple. "Why not? Anyway, I know this coin is really gold. I'm sure it'll come in handy. Let's move on. I've got a family to find." With that, Graham dusted himself off and turned north. Crispin flew behind, narrowly avoiding the tree. From ahead, Graham could hear a low ruffing accompanied by the sounds of a creature scratching the earth. As he came into a small clearing, the king could see a large dog, frantically trying to paw its way into a huge ant hill. The hill resembled, if nothing else, an earthen castle. In many ways, it reminded Graham of Castle Daventry. He could also see millions of black ants fleeing from the destruction the dog was inflicting on their home. The analogy was too much for Graham to bear. He quickly reached into his traveling bag and retrieved the stick he had found by the bee's tree. "Here, boy!" he shouted at the pooch, and deftly threw the stick in front of the dog. It looked up, saw the new toy, and darted to it. A sniff, a pair of licks, and a sudden grab with its jaws, the dog dashed off with the treasure. As the dog disappeared into the brush, Graham walked nearer to the anthill to survey the damage. It wasn't severe. Apparently the king had arrived not long after the four-legged flea bag. As he was examining the anthill, Graham was surprised by the appearance of an especially large ant who climbed to the very top of the structure. It seemed to be wearing purple robes, which was strange. It was even stranger when it began talking. "Thank you, noble sir, for saving our home. I am King Antony, monarch of the ants. Who may you be?" "Must be the magic white snake. That's why I can understand him," murmured Graham to himself. "I am King Graham of Daventry," he replied politely. "Ah, King Graham, I have heard of your quest, and wish you good fortune. Alas, there is nothing I can do at this time to aid you, but Take our best wishes, and if there's anything we can do in the future, be assured that we will do all we are able. Adieu! The Ant King turned away sharply, and followed by his myriad followers, disappeared beneath the earth. You sure meet the most unusual folks, commented Cedric. He broke the momentary silence from his new perch on a bush overlooking the anthill. And speaking of folks, isn't that a gypsy wagon just ahead of us? Gypsies claim to be able to read the future and see things that happen far away. Maybe they can help discover us what's happening to your family. Cedric, exclaimed Graham, I knew you'd come in handy eventually. That's a good idea. Let's go. The gypsy camp could easily be seen from the anthill, and it was just a short stroll up a wide path to get to it. One wagon, with a large fortune-teller sign painted in clashing colors on its side, was all that was in the camp. A dark, strong man sat near it on a rocking chair, braiding a leather belt and warily waiting for strangers. As Graham approached the wagon, the man got up and challenged him. It will cost you a gold coin to see the mystical Madame Mushka. The sullen man held out his hand expectantly. A gold coin? Hooted Cedric. I thought gypsies wanted their palms crossed with silver. Times are hard, was his curt reply. Graham listened to the exchange and decided that if Madame Mushka could help unravel the mystery of his family's kidnapping, then it would be well worth the price of his lone piece of gold. He placed it in the gypsy's calloused palm, and the man stepped aside to allow Graham to enter the wagon. Cedric decided to sit in a tree. I believe that it must be true in all the universes that the interiors of all gypsy wagons are dark, stifling places reeking of too much cheap incense and unwashed feet. It is part of their ambiance. So too are the worn exotic rugs and the overuse of striped and patterned fabrics. Madame Mushka looked as if her palm had been crossed with gold often, and most of the profit had gone to food. Each of her fingers wore a ring, sometimes several, and most seemed a size or two too small. They probably had fit correctly in the past. Graham says that her features were difficult to make out behind all the smoke, but her eyes burned through the choking haze and into his skull. By them alone, he was sure that the gypsy was no fraud. Sit, she commanded. Graham obeyed. I can see that you are on a great and dangerous quest, with much danger to you and others that you love. Madame Mushka waved and crossed her pudgy hands several times above and around a clear globe sitting on the table in front of her. Akewata, atuwata, istasa sesere. Look deep into my crystal ball, King Graham. Yes, you are King Graham of Daventry. Your family has been taken from you. Far away they are. Look! Ensnared by the enchantment of the crystal, Graham leaned closer and looked deeper. A sudden gasp escaped him. Inside the globe was his home, shrunken and imprisoned in a glass retort, sitting on a laboratory shelf. In front of Castle Daventry stood his family, imprisoned in the same small bottle. Next, a smoke filled the crystal ball, and when it cleared, he was looking at his son, Alexander. Alexander was clutched in the clawed hand of a sorcerer, who could only be Mordak. He was holding Alexander just out of the diamond claws of a large black cat, who was snarling and swiping at him. Ghostly voices filled Madame Mushka's wagon. Look at the treat for you, Mananin, my brother. See how it wiggles and squirms. Mordak held the prince closer to the cat, teasing it and pulling Alexander away just before Mananin's claws might tear him apart. Look what you have done to my brother, princeling. Look, Only you can transform him back into his real form. Only you! By now, Mordak was screaming. The crystal clouded again, and Graham was looking closely at his son's face. You've made some kind of mistake, Mordak. I don't know anything about magic, I promise. I just turned man into a cat by accident. Believe me! Alexander was so obviously trying to deceive the wizard, trying to protect his mother and sister. I believe you not at all, worm. I will give you one final warning. Return Manan to his proper form, and soon, or I shall start feeding the cat. Oh yes, your lovely mother will be the first to become cat food, bit by painful bit. Think on that. Sleep on that. I'll be back for your decision. The image changed again, back to that of the people and castle in the bottle. Manannan was clawing at it, trying to bite through the glass. The cat's spittle flowed thickly down the outside of the glass. Graham's family looked upon the mad Manannan. Holding hands, they faced their coming deaths with courage, and quite a bit of fear. The crystal ball clouded for the last time, and when it cleared, no image dwelled within it. Graham could only stare at it, stunned, angry and horrified. He knew he had just witnessed truth. Mordak is an evil one, the gypsy said softly. Your task is much more dangerous than I foresaw. Please take this. It is not much, but it will protect you from all but the most powerful magics. Bringing her hand from beneath the table, Madame Mushka handed Graham an amulet containing a single, softly glowing stone. Put this on when you go outside. Good luck, King Graham of Daventry. Madame Mushka pulled a curtain between her and Graham, leaving him alone. For several long moments he sat. Then he slowly wiped one eye and left the wagon. King Graham is not one to dwell too long on the pity of self or the unfairness of fate. By the time Cedric fluttered near him, his normal good humor had returned. Or so he says. I suspect that new lines of determination had impressed themselves into his jaw, and that there was a hardness behind the twinkle in his eye. He looked at Cedric and said, How were the bugs? There are better ones near Crispin's house, and it's not far from here to the east. Then that's the way we're headed. Watch out you don't fly into any more trees. Graham placed the gypsy amulet around his neck and looked at the stone's glow for a moment. Leaving the gypsy man and Madame Mushka's wagon behind, the two went on their way. Part the 4th. The road to Crispin's skirted just north of a small pond. Thinking that he would like a drink, Graham bent and took a handful of water. He spat it out at once because of its saltiness. Yuck! The royal family's favorite wood of disgust spat out with the water. As he did, he looked up and saw that a large weeping willow tree was partially shading the pond. From its branches, which overhung the water, Graham could see small drops of liquid falling. Drip, 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 drip. Not only was the tree's shape like that of a sorrowing woman, its twists and bumps and hollows even had the image of a beautiful girl. In her hand was a harp, and Graham was sure magic was at work there. She seems to be playing a sad tune, Graham, said Cedric. Maybe we should try to cheer her up. Cheer up a tree? Graham was not amused by the owl's suggestion, but it was something to do to take his mind off his own troubles. He walked closer. Do you take requests? Do you know Greensleeves? To Graham's imminent surprise, although why at this point in his quest he should have been surprised at anything is beyond me, the willow spoke. That was not funny, sir. You can talk? Why not? Once I was a human woman. What happened? One day my sweetheart and I were walking through the forest when we met an old ugly witch. She was smitten at once by the fairness of my prince's face, and she tried to steal him from me. He refused. I think I've heard this story before. Is your name Alicia? Graham asked. Of course. Have you met my dear Herbert? Oh, you must have. Anyway, since she couldn't steal his heart, she put him to sleep and then stole mine and then turned me into a tree. She stole your heart? She turned it to gold and carried it away with her. Her last words were that if anyone were to return the heart to me, I would become a human princess again. Until then, I must forever stand here and weep. Sad story indeed, said Graham. If we see Herbert again, we'll tell him where to find you. If we come across your heart, we shall return it. I can promise you not more. The weeping willow Alicia fell silent except for the drip from her branches. Graham motioned Cedric that they should continue on, and they moved eastward, silently. They had not gone far when they noticed a large sign next to the trail. It simply stated, "Enter at your own risk." Snaking past it to the north was a much narrower path that seemed to disappear into deep gloom. "You don't want to go there," sputtered Cedric. "That's the dark forest, and it's so easy to get lost in it that no one ever enters it anymore. Crispin is always grousing about an old hag who has her home in there. He says she's a particularly nasty witch with a taste for human stew and roast bird." A witch? Perhaps she's the one who stole the willow's heart. We did promise Alicia we'd return it if we found it. Graham's kind heart was tugging him northward. We? I don't recall making any such promise. Cedric was not happy about the direction this conversation was taking. Well, I did, Cedric, and I'm obligated to take a look around. Stay here if you wish. Besides, we still need to find something to pay for our provisions. Who knows what we might find in the dark forest? Woo! Woo! That's what I say. I'm staying here, King. Go if you'd like, but the dark forest scares me. I'll wait for you, but not as long as I did while you were in the desert. Huffily, Cedric began preening his feathers for lice as Graham walked into the deep woods. The dark forest is called so not so much because little light enters, which it doesn't, but because of the dark mood that seems to drop on folks while they are there. Decay is everywhere, and all the trees and bushes and flowers and plants are twisted, wrong somehow. Toads and fungi find the place delightful. A few moments of damp walking brought Graham to a fork in the path. The choice between east and west was of little matter to him. Both ways were equally unappetizing and rapidly vanished into heavier forest. Graham chose east, and almost at once was swallowed by the undergrowth. This may have been a mistake, Graham mumbled to no mushroom in particular. After a few steps up the path, he attempted to retrace his steps and discovered that he was lost. He could find no trace of the way back out, and all he could do was trek on. Graham did. At times he was sure he was walking in circles, even though he was positive he was merely walking north. The rest of the time he walked in perplexity. Eventually the path widened a bit and turned to wander west for some reason. Graham saw a grotesque tree near where the trail turned that was larger and more ominous than the others he had been seeing. From a distance, it appeared to have a small door inset in its trunk and a slimy critter trail leading right to it. The tiny path was well worn and edged with bones, some of them human. When Graham got up to the tree, his observation of a door was confirmed. In fact, the door even had a keyhole, and it was locked tight. After a few hard tugs, the king gave up, shrugged his shoulders, and continued on to see where the main trail was leading him. It led him to the witch's house, and the crone looking to cause trouble. Let me pause for another brief aside. In his adventures, King Graham has encountered 3 witches, of which I am aware. Dahlia, the mistress of the gingerbread house, he was able to avoid and sneak up on, pushing her into her own oven. Dame Hagatha, Manannan and Mordak's repulsive sister, he was able to avoid altogether, much to his relief, although he has since said that he regrets not pushing her into her own stew pot when he had the chance. In retrospect, it might be said that Graham had the upper hand in his dealings with witches up until then. This 3rd one, Graham never learned her name, acted as if she had been waiting for Graham. Perhaps she was just defending her home. No sooner had he noticed the odd bridge crossing to the house than the hag materialized in front of him and cast a spell in his direction. It hit Graham full upon his face and his body tingled for a moment. As he glanced down, he could see Madame Mushka's amulet grow brighter and absorb the malevolent energy. Graham escaped unscathed. Of course, he still had a nasty witch to deal with. Maybe I can buy her off with something, Graham improvised. Maybe she'll make the same error I did and mistake the brass bottle for gold. Maybe I should do something fast. Good day, madam. I am lost. Would you by any chance know the way out of these woods? Graham tried politeness first. These are my woods you are trespassing in, stranger. There is no way out. You are my prisoner now. Would you care to join me for dinner? Graham's options had quickly become extremely limited. Taking the brass bottle he had carried from the desert, he casually sauntered to the hag and handed it to her. Perhaps this gift of mine might change your mind? He ventured. The witch greedily snatched the bottle from Graham, and with a phlegmy cackle unhesitatingly opened it. It was, we hope, her ultimate mistake. Cedric had been correct about the possibility of a genie residing in the artifact. However, it wasn't a benign genie, and it wasn't granting any wishes. The instant the genie popped out, he glanced around with a hateful look in his eyes. He saw the witch, with the telltale lid still in her hand, pointed to her with a long taloned finger and boomed, "Ha! Free at last! Let's see how you like spending 500 years in a dark bottle!" A great flash lit the sky, and when Graham could see again, the witch, the genie, and the bottle had all disappeared. I'm sure glad I didn't open it. King Graham's gift of understatement is legendary. Graham contends that it is good policy never to let an evil witch's home go unsearched. You never know what you might find in there, and the stench isn't too bad after a while. Some feel that what you might find in a witch's house might be worse than the witch itself. Of course, it is a monarch's right to make policy. Since Graham is not my monarch, I feel free to state that it is not a policy with which I would agree. With that said, let me also report that Graham made the proper decision in entering the hag's house. If he hadn't, he would have lost everything. Free of deadly distraction, Graham took a moment to look at the witch's misshapen house. It looked like it was made from a hollow rock, through which more of the forest's eerie trees were growing, although it may have been the other way around. The house could only be approached via a narrow bridge that had no handrails, just huge rib bones as sides. In all directions, the dark forest smothered the place, giving Graham the impression that to enter there was to enter a grave. But he did cross the bridge to the witch's house, the bridge spanning a deep crevice. Graham could see no bottom to the chasm, just the hot, bright glow from the fires of Hades. In contrast, the inside of the place was cold and frigid, like the breath of the dead. Graham shivered, and not just from the cold. It took the king but a short while to search the odd structure. In an old trunk, he found a small spinning wheel with specks of gold dust in its joints. A hanging incense burner, which apparently used dried mugwump for fragrance, held a tiny brass key. Graham was sure it fit a locked door in a certain nearby tree. Finally, in the drawer of a small pedestal, he discovered a leather bag. Inside were 3 green emeralds. Treasure indeed. Any one would buy his assault on Mordak. He took them all, and with light steps, headed off to test the key in the tree. The key fit when Graham tried the lock, as he was sure it would. Inside lay a little golden heart on a red satin cushion. That the heart belonged to Alicia the Willow was a certainty. As he picked up the heart, however, he realized that getting out of the dark forest was not such a sure thing. Back the way he had come, of course, would not work. He had already tried that and failed. That left onward, beyond the witch's home. He knew that he could travel either west or south there, and he chose the western route. This took him through even stranger forest, with soft, flesh-eating plants and fungi that oozed phosphorescent liquids that most likely killed at the lightest touch. On all sides, Graham was sure he saw pairs of bright eyes watching him, following every movement. He ignored them and continued on, and on, and on. Around in a large, confusing loop, the path soon brought him back to the tree where he had found the heart. Sure he had missed a small path. Graham tried again. Back he came once more. The third try took the king south from the witch's bridge, and that returned him to the tree even sooner. Desperately, Graham tried to push through the brush and bushes, but could get nowhere. Around and around he went, finding no exit at all from the dark forest. All the time, he was watched by those bright eyes. Exasperated, Graham finally realized that his only chance to escape the woods lay with the Watchers. But no matter how still he waited, though, they would not make an appearance, nor a noise, just quiet blinks. At this bleak point, Graham was standing at a place just past the witch's house, where the path turned from west to south. There seemed to be more of the Watchers there than any place on the trail, so it was there that he set his bait. He picked the emeralds for his lure because of their bright sparkles. His plan was to drop one of the gems near him and catch whatever might come to claim it. It wasn't much of a plan, Graham admits, but it was all he could come up with at the time. The first emerald hit the ground and rolled several feet away from Graham. So swiftly that the king was unable to reach the errant stone, one of the little folk bolted out of the bushes, snatched the emerald, and disappeared again. By its appearance, the king thought it might be a small elf. "Drat!" Graham exclaimed. "Let's try another one." The second emerald suffered the same fate as the first, stolen away by an elf almost as soon as it touched the ground. This time Graham had a clearer view of the culprit, so he knew he was dealing with elves. He also knew he had only one gem left, and if he couldn't catch the elf with that one, he'd have no idea what to do next. As he pondered just how to make his scheme work, he recalled that his mother often said that one could always catch more flies with honey than with seawater. He never quite understood what that meant, but it served to remind him of the honeycomb he was carrying. Perhaps honey could catch elves as easily as it caught flies. Graham took the honeycomb and strongly squeezed it. The nectar that had been stored inside by the bees slowly oozed to the ground, forming a small golden puddle. Graham stuck the remaining beeswax back into his pouch and very carefully placed his final emerald in the sticky stuff. Quick as a blink, an elf darted out and became stuck in the goo. Graham picked up the little one and held him in front of his face. "Let me go! Let me go!" the elf squealed. "Please don't hurt me!" Small sir, Graham spoke, I'm looking for a way out of this infernal forest. If you let me go, I'll show you the way out, the elf interrupted. I give you my word. Your word is good enough for me, replied the king, as he gently placed the elf back on the ground, away from the honey puddle. The small mannikin looked up at Graham briefly and seemed to make a decision. He whistled. At once, what Graham had thought to be a large vine-covered rock stood up and moved. The path continued on, past where the strange creature had been. Follow me! The elf gestured for Graham to follow and dashed down the newly revealed road. Hurry up and stop gawking at Rocky the Jinx, the elf shouted back at him. Graham wasted no time and hurried after. The road quickly dipped below the ground into a tunnel that was obviously made for use by the little folk. Graham was forced to crawl through it on his hands and knees, and once or twice was forced to shimmy on his belly. He never got stuck, though, and soon emerged into a large, high cavern, brightly lit by huge fires, glowing from deep pits descending into the guts of the earth. The elf who had led him was waiting when he finally arrived in the cave. Sir, we are not so ignoble as to take without giving something in return. In payment for the 3 emeralds, we give you these fine elven shoes. We trust they will serve you well. The small passage you see across from you leads out of the dark forest. We wish you well on your journeys. Adieu! With a wave, the elf stepped out of sight into the shadows. Graham waved back, knelt down, and began his crawl to sunlight.